Funny conversations. It is this great Thursday. Sometimes people say Thursdays for throwback. Yes, with my guest today, we may be able to throw back. Actually, should we throw back anything? We will end up not talking about our subject today. And my guest, none other than Sisa Ntshona. He's the chief executive of SA Tourism Ngomo Shelo. Ngomo, it's good to have you on Putco Mafani Conversations. I think kuza umuntu omkhulu uzaduduma i-connections kwanzima.
Oh, lovely, Putco. Thank you for having me over. Such an honor, Mdange. It's been a while.
Yeah. And you're the chief executive at SA Tourism, and you've been there for quite some time, man. What is your role? I mean, SA Tourism, for me, it's like gateway of South Africa to the entire world and gateway of the entire world coming to South Africa. But to me, it looks massive. What's your role at SA Tourism?
That's a question my mother keeps on asking me all the time. But when's Andone SA Tourism? And exactly. I tell her, and then she says to me, "I open the whole day in. You're just on holiday all the time."
Yeah.
So look, I mean, tourism is a key sector in South Africa. It's part of our national development plan. And if you look at tourism, the purpose, Yakona, is to bring in as many people as you can from outside of the country to come and spend their euros, their dollars, their pounds, so that we can show up our economy. At the same time, it is also about South Africans traveling within their own country, so that people who make big money in Gauteng, as an example, can go on holiday in the Eastern Cape and spread that money around so that you can start to have the economy going. So at its heart of it, it's about spending money in the economy. Now, to give you a bit of a sense, it has different contributions to different countries. If you look at big countries like France, something like 30% of the GDP is made up of tourism. So therefore, it's an important element around growth and obviously jobs.
And then your job is to pull all these things together. You just spoke now, Ngomo, about the GDP and the sector's contribution in the country's economy from a GDP point of view and the percentages. How much of the country's economy does tourism contribute?
Sure. It's a 240 billion rands industry, every year in South Africa. And it accounts about 9% of our total GDP. To give you a bit of a sense, contribution, it's bigger than mining, within the South African context, just below agriculture. But that's kind of where we box in terms of that space.
And you should be having critical stakeholders that make you realize your dream. We may call them critical stakeholders. We may call them strategic stakeholders. Which are those? When you get to your office and you have meetings lined up and your PA says, "Mr. Ntshona, you got a very important meeting," there must be stakeholders that you think of ahead of anything else. And which are your stakeholders?
Right across the board. It starts off with the customer, right, which is the visitor, the tourists themselves, right? And understanding as to where we get our tourism activities coming from. So as an example, to always be close to where your source markets are at. You have to be close to the US market because it's an important market for us. Have to be close to the China market. Have to be close to the, to the UK market as well. And also, more importantly, on the continent, Nigeria is an important market for us, and so is Zimbabwe. So you start off your day by understanding your markets, because if anything happens in those markets, it impacts you directly as well. The second part is to understand, that's the demand side. Second part is to understand the supply side, right? So therefore, the hotels that you have in the country, the activities, is Robben Island open as an example, is Table Mountain open, is the different places open around. So you make sure that the supply side is actually looked after as well. Then ultimately you look at the environment, for tourism to happen, you need all of the other activities to kind of support it. So whether you're looking at safety and security, I know Undos is an important minister to us to make sure that our tourists are safe in the country. I look at the Minister of Transport, Minister Mbalula is important to us because if uti high, no cars can move, no planes can fly. So that becomes important. I look to Home Affairs because they are the ones who issue visas and processing and all of those things as well. So those are, in essence, the stakeholders. And then ultimately, we measure in terms of how much each tourist spends, because that's ultimately is the spend of each tourist in the country as well. So that becomes important.
I'm happy that you've come to this part of the conversation. Quite often when I go to Cape Town, I get a little bit of a disappointment that it does look like the Cape Townians don't know the tourism products in the Cape Peninsula. It looks like perhaps the view is that izindawo ze-tourists Asia. And the same maybe about abantu basempumalanga when it comes to Kruger National Park. They could be having this mentality that izindawo ze-tourists Asia. How much is domestic tourism from a marketing point of view? How much marketing is done of our tourism products to the local market now for South Africans to know South Africa?
You've actually hit a very important note there. Just from the bat, is that South Africa has a very weak domestic market and a stronger international market. If you look at economies around the world, it's the other way around. All tourism economies are built on strong domestic overlaid by international, right? And what you're noticing in Cape Town is actually across the board. ASEA as a country yet, to the full extent. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. I mean, Dange, you only have to look, 30 years ago, we needed passes just to move from one city to the next, right? As abantu amnyama. So mobility is not something that is ingrained within all of us, as an example, but it's changing over time. The second one, that even if you have the money, as an example, there's a confidence factor. There's nothing worse than checking into an expensive hotel, paying the money, but feeling excluded because we're who's from a similar background like you and everything else there. So programs such as the Short Left, it is all about saying that we are giving people permission to saying, travel your country, discover it as well. Now, for Short Left to work, you need the private sector to also respond and saying, hey, I look at this domestic market, I must price accordingly. Unfortunately, that's where the gap is at, because for a long time, the South African tourism industry has just been looking overseas. So if you look at their pricing, it's only intended for euros and pounds and dollars, right? So therefore now, what happens then, this price is not my price. It is actually international price. Now we've got a choice. We can either try to force those guys to reduce the pricing, and I'm saying force because there's nothing we can do. So by saying, can you reduce the pricing? Or we can invite new entrants to come in and saying, come in, but however, target this market that is underserved. That is the domestic market. And I think those are the dynamics that are there, because essentially you are marketing something that you have no control over around its pricing and delivery.
And how much is school tourism, how important is it that from a domestic market point of view, that we begin where it matters? We begin with schools, that we sort of revoke this passion with children, getting schools. How big is the relationship between SA tourism and schools in general to be able to drive the domestic market? And what efforts are there encouraging the domestic market from a tourism point of view?
Mdang, you're mentioning something quite real here. And I think we lost our passion as a country in terms of focusing on the young. Essentially, when you grew up in preschool, and you don't have to talk about long trips, just going to the park, going to the zoo, going to, just in a school train to go out and then come back. And then obviously playing sport, going to play other schools and everything else there. it is something that needs to be inculcated again. Just to give you a bit of a sense in terms of how we're structured, SA Tourism is a national body, and our key focus is more on international. I would say about 70-30. 70%, we spend our time looking at bringing international in, right? Then 30% becomes domestic. If you look, each province has also got a tourism authority. They are the ones who are also looking then at provincial activities around making sure we drive domestic tourism from that perspective there. So now, the advantage of targeting school kids is that you inculcate that culture of travel kwa early. So that bakhule nabo. I spoke about confidence, I'm sure you remember the very first time you checked into a hotel, you think it's easy, but if I ask do I get the key here, do I move? And no one wants to look like an idiot, if I put it that way. The very first time you got into an aeroplane, as an example, I asked, do I get a seat number and all of that? And I think if you start traveling as a child, by the time you get to an aeroplane, you walk there with confidence, as an example. And I think that's what we're missing at the moment. So that in part of a curriculum, traveling, getting to know the country becomes part and parcel around it. So it's something that we really want to ignite. And by the way, we live in very different environments now, whereby there are risks and liabilities and insurances and all of that. But we have to find ways of saying, you don't have to go far. Just take kids on the bus to the park and then get a distance longer and longer until you can start to look province to province, as an example.
And obviously, Ngomo, the reason why I asked this question about schools is because I am a product of school tours. In my dream as a lighty, knowing that I'm passionate about the radio, after having been caught trying to open the radio set, and the next thing, there's a school's tour to King Williamstown in East London. Yeah. Now that was big, and I'm trying to say I understand exactly what you are saying. It doesn't have to be a massive international trip. I am a product now as a broadcaster of school tours. When we got to East London, when we got to King Williamstown, Safike Radio Xhosa then, and my dream went wild when I saw Abasasas Veloklesha Besasas. So I truly identify with this, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. And I do know that SA Tourism has structures provincially, and they probably could be running with indaba yokuvuselela tourism yabantwana bezikolo around the tourism products in the various provinces. But talking about the 70% of international tourists, who makes the big chunk of that? Where do the most tourists that bring money to South Africa come from? What are those countries? And when they get here, where do they spend that money?
Got you. So to look at that equation, there's a volume and value balance there, right? So in terms of volume, 74% of our traffic comes from the continent, right? A lot of it comes from SADC, right? We call it the self-drive markets, the land borders. Now, this is no different from in Europe, as an example, because you always get your most visitors coming from those that are around you within reach. However, what you find that then, although they have the volume in terms of numbers, the average spend of each tourist coming from Africa is lower than outside of the continent, right? So therefore, the balance of the 20% comes mostly from US and Europe as well. China is growing quite nicely. Before COVID, Brazil was also doing quite well. Now, there are fewer numbers, but the expenditure is much higher. Now, where do they spend their money? It differs, right? Gauteng is a very big attraction point, and you'll see it what we call day trips, where people go and spend time in terms of retail shopping. Now, there's a view that South Africa's got too many shopping centers, which you can agree. However, if you look in terms of who is actually inside the shopping centers, I always try to give people a view. If we are a certain city, there's this shops there called Diamond Walk that you and I, Mdanga, stay away far from, right? And in Diamond Walk, there are these big shops. Stand there for a second and just close your eyes and listen to the voices of people that are there. they are not South Africans, right? A lot of them actually come from the continent. They come here and shop. Now, what basically happens, they bring in those dollars and euros and pounds, spend them over here, and that kickstarts our economy as well. Now, outside of shopping as well, you are very popular around the beaches. Our parks are very, very big. Kruger National Park, as an example, is as big as Israel in terms of landmass. It's as big as some of the European countries out there. So that in itself is a big attraction. And obviously Cape Town as well, with the Victorian Alfred waterfront as the most visited tourist site in the whole country, the V&A waterfront in itself. It gives you a bit of a sense where and how kind of the movement comes from that perspective. Our challenge, however, Mdanke, is to spread the benefits of tourism, not just to happen in these big nodes, right? But how do we get more of the wild coast? And we need to see investment in those places so that people don't go there to drive through, but they can stay in 4, 5, 6 days, as an example. We need to see investments also coming through the Northern Cape, as an example, so that tourism starts to spread across the 9 different provinces, because each province, features a very different offering, that South Africa has to offer. And that becomes key and important from that perspective.
Wow. And Nkomo, I want us to come to the crux of the matter. Every day, every morning, every evening, when you open the news bulletin, it is the implications of COVID-19 on a diversity of our sectors in South Africa. COVID-19 is a game changer. Some sectors will not go back to how they used to operate before COVID-19 came. I just want to find out from you, having conducted your surveys on COVID-19, which are probably the top 5 COVID-19 implications on tourism. How has COVID-19 hit tourism?
Yeah, so what are the big 5 takeaways? I think the first one is essentially around what the consumer wants as a priority, right? And top of mind now is going to be health, right? Consumers, tourists want to make sure that they can go and spend and do tourism activities, but they need to be safe, right? And so therefore, part of it is actually making sure that we can give comfort, we can give validation that actually South Africa has got health and operational protocols that will assist all of our visitors to be able to consume tourism properly. The second part then becomes also around the products, the trades, the hotels, the tour operators. They have to do so much changes and conversion. Just look at how you are going to be boarding an aircraft, as an example. It's going to be fundamentally different. How you're going to be boarding a taxi is going to be fundamentally different. How you check into a hotel, right? So you can forget about those big lobbies where you've got a doorman opening the door for you and the reception area and everything else there. To give a bit of a sense, you're going to see a lot more technology coming into play. You'll be able to check in yourself into your room in a hotel. So when you get to the hotel, you just simply go to the room and tap your phone to open the door. The unfortunate thing about COVID, these changes that we have to make have a direct impact on people's jobs, because essentially now social distancing is all about minimizing human interaction, right? And tourism has been such a good contact sport because it's about people. Now, what you're trying to do is to try to minimize the people interaction within this tourism value chain. And that's going to be a very difficult balance over there. Suddenly now, when you enter into a hotel, there's no doorman for you, right? There's no one picking up your luggage. There is no reception desk, right? And you think of all those jobs that are sitting over there, that even, by the way, there is no buffets in restaurants, because that spoon that we all use suddenly now becomes an instrument that we transfer the virus on, right? So all of these things are going to start to build in that. Actually, when you are traveling even overseas, the questions that are going to be asked in terms of a visa application are no longer going to be how much money do you have, can you sustain yourself over there? It's going to be about your health history so that you don't pose a risk for the environment that you are going in, and vice versa. So all these changes are really going to come through. We're going to be seeing that we're going to be traveling more with people that we know, our core as it is, whether your family it is, and we'll probably move more towards self-drive, road trips, as opposed to getting into a taxi or some form of transport with many other people. That's until and unless we can get a vaccine. Because I think when you get a vaccine, we can start to see things coming into a very different environment. But for now, we are learning and we are making mistakes. We're making mistakes here. We're making mistakes globally. So we're watching every single day because new data points are coming through. You start to hear about second waves, of infections starting to come through. What lessons can we pick up from there? We're starting to learn around masks, as an example, and washing your hands and everything else there. Again, it's about making these just habits as opposed to things that you can think about. And I'm sure you can ask yourself, how many times have you gone outside or to the car and you forget your mask and you have to turn around because it's not natural. Now it's almost going to be the way that, you can't leave the house without your cell phone. So it's those things that are going to be, we are learning, right? If I could also give a view that this is the time also for opportunity for disruption. We need new people to enter the sector to say, how can I do things differently that appeals to this new type of traveler who has different needs to make sure that they can meet that path there.
My guest, Sisa Ntshona, the Chief Executive Officer of SA Tourism, today on Putco Mafani Conversations. We're having this awesome conversation. I'm also learning quite a number of things that are happening in the sector. Your comments are welcome on Facebook Live. Tell your friends about it. It's Putco Mafani Conversations on Facebook and also Putco Mafani Conversations on YouTube live simultaneously. Well, it is now 12 minutes to the hour of 6. We will go beyond 6. And apologies to those that were waiting for us as we had a little bit of technical glitches getting on our show today. Ngomo, you spoke about jobs that are under threat because of COVID-19. And I'm trying to imagine in the tourism value chain, and I'm thinking about the poor tourist guides, whether full-time or part-time, who are the most hit and how are they hit in the tourism value chain from a job security point of view because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, look, I think all of our jobs, whether we're in tourism or any other sector, is something that we all have to relook in terms of how we reshape it. But you're absolutely right. Within the tourism space, as I said, tourism is a contact sport, right? It's all about immersion, it's all about socializing. And unfortunately, we are in the business of mobility, of moving people around. And that's what the virus needs in order to spread, is people moving around. So therefore, how then do you have people moving around, being safe and not spreading the virus, as it were? And I think those are some of the key questions that are being asked there. Secondly, as well, you are right. If you look at the value chain, we employ 750,000 people directly by tourism itself. And indirectly, that number could easily go fourfold. And here's what I mean by indirectly. If you operate in an environment and you operate a bakery, as an example, right, you actually don't realize that you are in tourism, because when the tourists don't come to town, suddenly now the demand for your bread has gone down because the restaurants are not open, right? And there, if you look at it in this entire chain, when a tourist comes and lands at OR Tambo or in Cape Town and hires a vehicle and drives across the country, when they refuel that car, right, that's us money they spend to put fuel. So there's an impact then on the fuel industry, right? You look at an establishment like Sun City. I enjoy speaking to the general manager over there because he can tell me that in a weekend, Sisa, we cracked open 40,000 eggs, as an example, right? Now, when Sun City closes, is not operating like it is right now, those are 40,000 less eggs that are being consumed, right? And to give you a sense in terms of that trickle down effect and right across the board. So even people who may not be classified as tourism, who are in the arts and crafts and make beads as an example, suddenly that bus that stops and 100 people get off and wander around is no longer there. That's the impact that really starts to come through in terms of the sector itself. Now, when we imagine a future, and the future, by the way, is not post-COVID, it's with COVID, right? And that says, how then do we make sure that people can travel while still feeling safe and is removing, again, the human interaction as much as possible? Now, whilst you can never replace the human interaction, we have to start thinking differently. So a tour guide, would they be replaced by an app, as an example, right? That you just plug on your phone and it becomes your tour guide, right? Or is it going to be a virtual tour guiding, as an example? We don't know. And I think we're looking for innovation around there. So previously, if you were a tour guide, you needed to be physically in the bus and talking. Can you do it now from the lounge of your home, but plugged into the tourists who are walking wherever they are walking? I don't know. And I think those are the things that are just going to be explored and more. The trends that we are seeing is that whilst the big establishments, right, were the popular ones, in a COVID environment, it's actually the smaller ones that are rural that are popular now. You'll want to go into a place with big spaces, into a place where you can actually take over that unit yourself, whether it's a 2-bedroom lodge or whatever it is. And essentially, you'll have a choice. Do you want someone to come clean that lodge for the 3 days you are there, or you'll do it yourself? And you'll get anything in between. I think some families may even want to bring their own linen and cutlery, as an example, right, to on a weekend, and some not. And I think these are then the things that we're starting to tease out and see as to where is the comfort point of what South Africans need and what they are looking for as well. Then lastly, Mdange, when we think of tourism, we tend to only look at leisure alone, but there's also the business tourism side, which is such a huge element. And I'm talking here about the conferences and the conventions that you see happening all the time. That was the first place that was actually hit because we saw mass cancellations, right? So when a conference happens at the Cape Town ICC, as an example, 10,000 delegates come from all over the world for 3 or 4 days and congregate over there. That's cancelled. When the Cape Town Jazz and the festivals are cancelled, you can think about the opportunity cost and the activities that are being cancelled as a result of that. Because people travel for a reason. You travel for a concert, you travel for sport, and when that travel is no longer allowed or being restricted, the ripple effect is far.
I was actually just about to ask you from a sports tourism point of view, because tourism to me seems so broad that it has the sub tourism, if I may say, the sub brands of tourism, if I may say, that you have business tourism, you have sports tourism, and the fact that there is no Comrades Marathon, there is no Soweto Derby, there is no Bafana Bafana, and how does that translate to the hotels and the jobs in the value chain? It's a major disruption, Komole yenzekileyo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from a domestic tourism perspective, our big numbers usually come around the Easter period. And it's all about religious tourism, right? Of people traveling to Morib, as an example. They go there,
Mm.
they spend money over there, they stay in B&Bs, they stay around, they spend money for those couple of days. Now, what you have found is that that community has been deprived of that injection that comes through there, right? So you're not seeing those numbers starting to come through from that perspective. You are right that the subsectors of tourism are wide, whether you're looking at sport, as I said, whether you're looking at religious tourism or any other entertainment, think about it. How many times have you driven hundreds of kilometers to a show to go watch your favorite artist go play over there? How many times have you driven hundreds of kilometers to go watch your team play, right? Those have come to a standstill. And what has basically happened is that those tills are no longer ringing because they were expecting those visitors to come through. Those tills are dry, and that becomes a problem. The challenge that we have now is these what you call virtual or I forgot the word, but without spectators. Sport is opening up without spectators,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
As an example. Now, yes, the victory that sport is happening, but without spectators now loses a bit of that completeness side. A soccer match without spectators, without speakers, has lost that element of it. And remember, a soccer match or a sporting match is just 90 minutes or 80 minutes, right? But you've traveled 200 kilometers, you go spend a weekend over there. Now, with each time you spend over there, you spend money. And if you realize that the economic footprint you leave behind after that weekend becomes a catalyst for that economy that keeps it going, right? So we're in a really tough spot right now in the sense that the economy has literally come to a standstill because there's just no movement from that side.
Wow. My guest again, Sisa Ntshona. He's the chief executive of SA Tourism, and we're talking about the rippling effect and the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on the industry. Watching from Kokstad is Musa Spellman. How I wish my learners could have had the opportunity to listen to this. So informative. I think Musa must be a teacher. And then, these are the Department of Basic Education. They also need to plug in and make sure that schools do take, this. But Nkomo, let's just go back to the evening when President Ramaphosa announced the relaxation in as far as government laws and regulations, when he announced alert level 3, where we are now. How did you interpret this? What is it that at least gave tourism some breathing space, and tourism felt good about it? And should the president come again and announce alert level 2, what would be the benefits and the implications on tourism?
Yeah, Mdange. A lot went into the background in lobbying before the announcement of tourism being allowed in level 3. In the original classifications, tourism was classified as a level 1 activity. So meaning it only opens when you hit to level 1. Now, what we did as a sector was to say, we understand why we're at level 1, because we're at risk. We're all about moving people. And if we move around, the virus moves as well. So what we said then is that if we introduce some stringent protocols, health protocols at our hotels, at our tour guides, at our activities right across the board, will this then help? In the view, what we wanted to was to de-risk tourism from being rated at level 1 to now rated at level 3. What that basically meant then was that once the country moves down to level 3, certain parts of tourism were allowed to operate, right? Now, are we there yet? No, Mdange, we're nowhere near there. We're still far way off from opening up 100%. Now, what is the sequence of this? It is saying that the easing up of tourism is going to be led inside out. Sizoqala get domestic tourism, then regional tourism, then international tourism itself. And we are doing the sequencing in the essence of understanding of saying, what are your levers that you can almost release immediately without incurring further risk? And the first one was to say, okay, let's open up domestic, but only for business travel, because we need to get the economy going as well, right? Then the next stage, as the president announced last week, was to say, okay, now that things are moving, okay, let's now allow the next layer, which is leisure tourism, right? But however, send caveats in all of this, because leisure tourism will be allowed, but only within your province. So you can't go to another province to enjoy tourism as well. Once we get confidence of this, then we open up the next one. So let's open up for SADC. I think now we're a bit more confident to open up our borders a little bit and allows the Mozambiques, the Botswanas, the Zimbabwe's to flow in a bit. Then ultimately, once we have that confidence, to open up internationally. Because whilst we are looking at our own challenge of managing the pandemic, we also have to keep our eye on the rest of the world, because we've got to choose now who's our friends, because you don't open up the borders and for people to come in and import the virus in there.
The
So you want
virus.
to choose, yeah, you want to choose countries that have been behaving and managing it well, and say, I'm comfortable with this one. We can let them in, jalo jalo. Now, it's not a perfect science, but it's a process of saying, let's gently open up the sector, because it is hurting, Dang. I mean, you have seen, some announcements around establishments closing that are in tourism, hotels not opening up, casinos, etc. And that's the tough balance that government has, of one hand, of managing the pandemic, but also at the same time managing livelihoods. You either die from the virus or die from hunger. And I think it's how then now do you open up the tool simultaneously but gently, but allowing the activities to happen. And then lastly as well is that this is not a South African phenomenon. It's a global one, all right? All around the world, we are seeing these pressures and we are seeing these play out, and we are learning and observing, but also contributing as well as to how, you open up the sector.
Well, I think you've covered me on the question about tourism in post COVID-19, and thanks for that correction, Gomo. Kau City, actually, there's no post COVID, it is with COVID. The future is not post COVID, the future is with COVID. I actually found that to be um, uh, quite an awesome statement to make, because it's true, it's real. My guest today is Sisa and Ntshona, and we're having a chat on tourism and COVID-19. Um, I sometimes wonder, and I'm glad that today I'm having this conversation with you. I sometimes wonder when I see visuals on television of protest march, whether it's protest marches about service delivery in municipalities, whether it is race related, whether it is gender based violence related, whether it's just politics. How much do these kind of spectacles affect tourism? You sit there as the chief executive of SA Tourism, and you're watching the news, and there are visuals of Santaco and taxis, staging an absolute N1, M1, N2, N3 shutdown. How does this hurt tourism?
Okay. So it does. It impacts us directly when I'm done. And these are some of the frustrations. These are things that are necessarily out of our control, but impact us directly. So before you sell a destination and saying, come to the Wild Coast or come to wherever it is, you've got to sell the country. The country brand becomes important, because when people think of South Africa, they recall certain things, right? There was a time when people thought of South Africa, they recalled apartheid, they recalled repression, a regime, etc., etc. Then there was a time when they, recall South Africa, they thought of, Nelson Mandela, they thought of freedom, they thought of, all sort of things. So you got to ask yourself, the times that we're in now, when people think of South Africa, what do they think of? And we've got to make sure that we are able to balance that view. Now, there are certain things that you simply cannot spin, that you simply can't market. It is what it is, but it's about dealing with it. Now, the key thing, what we found, is that there is nothing more powerful than word of mouth. Now, we can put up as many posters, as many things as we want, but when people come here and they experience it, they actually walk away with such a positive feeling. And you know what the number one thing, they say, is South Africa's secret weapon? It is not our beautiful weather, it's not our beautiful beaches, not our animals. It's actually the people. It's me and you,
The people,
right? There's just something in us, that people love in terms of how we communicate, how we interact, and everything else, basically, from that perspective as well. Then also, you got to look at this thing from a domestic side. Having grown up in the rural side of the Eastern Cape, your perception of Johannesburg was a big, scary place, I'm sure. Your perception of Cape Town, your perception of everything else. So therefore, you made the decision whether to go there or not based on what you perceived, as an example, right? And now, how do we build confidence and comfort that you are able to go to other parts of the country feeling comfortable, feeling secure as well. Township tourism is something that is big, that is growing. And I always say is that we need more than one Vilakazi street. Each town needs a Vilakazi street, in my example, because each one's got its own flavors that you can kind of put through over there. But it's amazing about townships, if you go to a township that you don't belong in and you are walking, someone can see just by the way you walk by, Lapari is not from here, as an example.
Yeah.
Similarly as well. So then how do we make it, comfortable that we are able to go to each other's places and be hosted by each other? You don't need to have a friend, but naturally that abantu basemlazi or basem Tanzania, when they see a non-Tanzania in their area, they must smile and be joyful, because they must see someone who's going to come spend money in their economy that will create jobs and economic activity, etc., etc.
Ngomoshe, I have to ask you to talk to us and the viewers live on Facebook, live on YouTube about how are tourism incentive programs, for instance, the green tourism, how are these incentive programs affected now? Is there future for these programs? Okay, I see Sabelo Hlanganisa in Cape Town says, what role is the tourism department playing in terms of transformation, black business support, township development, awareness in black townships, women, and all of that? Maybe let's begin with Sabelo's question, how committed is SA tourism, good transformation, good black business development, and maybe let's address ourselves to his issue.
100%. Transformation is critical and key. And let me give you our take of what we see transformation as. Transformation is not a zero-sum game. It's not about replacing Oyan with Osipo, right? Because what happens then, you've just not grown anything. You've just changed the complexion of what you have over there, right? That's the first part. Now, if, as an example, I look at tourism as if it was my shop. At the moment, I'm only having 8 products, right? Because the sector in itself is not owned a lot by black people. Now, the expression of what you see as tourism activities is based on the minority of the country owning, certain assets over there. So let's say there are 8 things. Now, here's where I'm at, is I want to encourage new players to come in so that I can have more things on my shelf, as an example, and move from 8 to 30. Now, I don't want to replace and keep it at 8 and just change the ownership of that 8. I want to move from 8 to 30. Now, what does that mean? It means, therefore, I can appeal to a wider audience of people around the world, number one. Number two, it means then I can make tourists stay longer in the country that they previously stayed. And the longer they stay, the more they spend in this economy as well. So the view around this to say, fortunately, tourism is a growing sector. And I'm inviting people to think about what role they can play in there. With one proviso, please don't come in and add more of the same. Come in and add something different to this shelf of mine, please. I need to move from 8 to 30. Add different things on that shelf so that I can look at this shelf and say, hey, today, because there's just so many things. And just, it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, right? Now, lastly, in tourism, of course, tender up, right? There is no big, kind of RPs and everything we got here. It's all about the consumer. The consumer makes the decision as to where they spend their money, that establishment or whatever establishment, right? The reality is as follows, is that for the majority of the population of this country, black people essentially, nothing within tourism has ever been developed specifically for them, right?
Yeah.
Think about that one. Nothing developed specifically for them. Whether, I always ask the simple question, take breakfast 11, as an example, but yet it's something that's there. So therefore, bringing in something that different means coming in and building with the end in mind that says, I'm building for 1 million Putcos out there. This is their establishment, as an example. So therefore, in that shelf, it's just not another more of the 8, but it's about 9, 10, etc., etc. So there's definitely more things to do over there. And it's such an open sector. You don't need permission to say, I'm not in the tourism space. It's about saying, look at yourself, look at the friends around you, look at people that you know. When they travel, what would they like to see? What would they like to have? What is missing? And is that thing that's missing that you can say, how do I plug that gap and make sure that it becomes part and parcel of it? Our role and duty as SA Tourism is to profile this and make sure it's visible out there. Because as I said, ultimately, what I want to see is more products, and the more products I have, the better. But at some point in time, they are Table Mountain. After some time, it's like, okay, once it's done, right? But what else is there along the line, right? Is that, again, at the same time, at some point in time, it's more like, if you like, as a street is exhausted now, what other street can I show, right? Engazunmenya, by the way, ezauba of similar, quality standards and delivery, etc., etc. And that then becomes the key thing around there, in terms of how we showcase. Sometimes we tend to underestimate what we have and say, "Hi, rural ifuna, masiphucule siyenze this." But actually, it's the rural side that people want, right? It's that authentic side. It is about the food, the flavors, the culture, and everything else. How then do we package this so that, it gets served, to the target audience?
And talking about the rural and talking about the flora and fauna of South Africa, there was a time when I remember just before the 2010 FIFA World Cup and Nelson Mandela Bay tourism, amazingly led by Mandlakazi Skefile. We were packaging Nelson Mandela Bay as the home of the Big Five or the Big Seven, actually.
Yeah.
How much of those kind of packages are we positioning out there? If Nelson Mandela Bay is the home of the Big Seven, how much of that domestically do we showcase? Abantwana base-New Bright bayayazi le Big Seven. Abantwana baseTinarha banobuhle bayayazi le Big Seven. Do they relate to it? Okanye mhlambe ipackagelwe international tourists kuphela. Fumanise uba zikhona izinto ezi-unique ngezi city zethu nezidolophu zethu neelali zethu, but ubukhulu becala ingathi siba excited xa sibona kufika belungu bevela overseas. I'm thinking about this Big Seven thing. It sounds exciting, but nam zange ndide ndiyibone i-Big Seven ndikhombe ndithi, hey, it's a Big Seven 14, So are you worried about that kind of gap? Ukuthi sinezi zinto sizipackageayo but abantu bakuthi abarelate nazo?
Yeah, I'm absolutely worried about that gap. So what the World Cup did was to put us in a global stage, and it did it very well. But what we didn't do was to say, after the World Cup, what then? And I think what we did is we kept our eyes looking for the next big World Cup to come through. Instead of saying, let me use the World Cup as a springboard, but the bread and butter must be domestic, right? The bread and butter must be domestic. And if you look, there was a time around 2015, 2016, when there was an Ebola outbreak in West Africa, right? A couple of things happened. The world decided that all of Africa has got Ebola, because according to the world, we are one country, right? And what happened basically is that the international tourists stopped traveling to the continent, right? And what it did, it has exposed Bahaibo. We are waiting for people that are not coming. That should have been an opportunity saying, how then do we repurpose ourselves to look at domestic? Now, where we're at right now is that for the foreseeable future, we have to take care of ourselves. The borders will remain closed. I don't know for how long, but they remain closed. So if you are not able to readjust yourself and saying, let me be focused on the domestic market, you're going to be out in the cold. You either will wait until when international opens, or you can say, yes, no, I may not be getting that full £1,000, right, that I'm usually getting. But he has known 1,000 rands is better than nothing at all. So let me work myself around. And that's what we are saying to the sector in terms of repurpose yourself and make sure that you're able to drill on that side. Now, it is changing that psyche that says tourism does not start from outside in. It starts from inside out. That all of us, my expectation and my anticipation is that I'd like for each and every single South African to become a tourism ambassador. That basically means how Zambela Paya kufike chap outside the country as ibuz by man. Where can I go for some nice lunch in the income? You must be able to say, no, man, I can recommend the following 2 or 3 places. Now, I'll pangel in tourism, but at that point in time, because who's across the street or Tibanai, that's the role that you've got to play, basically. Nightlife, what do I do? You must be able to say. Now, you can only be able to show them where the big 7 is if you yourself have been to the big 7 or yayas. Yeah, God. Because when you figure pamphlet, I mean, I've heard about this big 7. If you go that becomes a problem. So again, here, well, as we said earlier on, we would want to start from school level. It becomes part of the curriculum. It becomes part of just your orientation that you know your country back to back. Yeah, but so that say London now travel, tell me about South Africa. What can I do over there? Here's a pamphlet. And I think that's that pride, because when you hear and see other people speak about their country, it's always with such passion. And I love watching Americans, by the way, right? So when they're in the country. But as soon as they leave the border, the flag becomes the most important thing, and they will defend that honor of that flag itself. But nobody caps about America, they were tops in America, etc., etc. Now, what we've got to change, including myself, my own household, much up, but nobody caps NY. Did you put any cap NY? Right? You should be wearing one that says Cape Town or Durban or wherever it is. Again, carrying that spirit of saying, you are an ambassador, or you post out in Akala and Zambela around tourism, because you understand when tourism does well, the economy does well. When the economy does well, employment does well, and everyone does well. So you don't need to be directly in it, but understand the impact that it has and what role that you can play to it.
Well, Gomo, we have about 12 minutes before we wrap it up. Picking up from what you've just said now, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is tourism, or shouldn't tourism, therefore, be part of school curriculum?
Absolutely. I think if I had my way, it should be part of school curriculum formally in itself, whether it's geography or whatever it is from that perspective. But it also should be a way of life. And what I mean by a way of life, it should be just about orientation. I think these days, life orientation, right?
Life orientation,
You learn about social skills, about interaction. You learn about other people. I think, we only got to see anything, only when you got to your teens and later on in life, but learning about them and everything else there, but also learning about our country, is one thing to learn about Ushaka Zulu, as an example, from the history books, pictures. But when you are there, as an example, you start to see, this is where the war happened. This is the capture site, Mandela, as an example. This is what happens in everything else from that side. Now, here's an interesting thing that we are seeing as well, Dan, is that as much as I said, you also want to capture Abandwana so that Babe used to traveling around. We are seeing a lot of Omakulu, Notatomkulu, who missed out on the opportunity to travel this country, get to know this country because of the apartheid. Now, Galela Yabo or his Stockfells are starting to move in numbers, as an example. And that's something we want to promote, right? As, whether they get their pensions or whatever it is. I've never been to Elwand. You'll be surprised how many people in Johannesburg have not been to the sea, as an example. Now you're able to say, through Stockfell saying, instead of end of the year buying whatever it is, Stockfell buys, as an example, whether it's consumables and everything else there, buy an experience. And that's the difficulty. if I may just digress a little bit, tourism is something you consume immediately. Ayonto oyithengayo ukwazi unxiba over and over again, right? And I think sometimes we have what I call consumption backlog. Sithanda izinto thina ezithengwayo ezibonakalayo ukuthi hayi yabona hayi ndithengile nasi ifoni into ekhona nje wena wenze ntoni hayi ndenze i-tourism okay iphi hayi lapha isesifodweni uyaqonda le and it's then how do you say is that i-welfare yakho, i-health yakho, i-exposure yakho, i-ability to dream and see is something that's important. Now, here's the thing. Once umuntu aqale ukuhamba and experience other things, they never stop. They never stop. They just want to continue all of the time. You know, ask yourself a simple thing. You know, we talked about the different things of tourism. There's also what you call gastronomy tourism, food tourism. Now, imagine that first sensation of something new in your mouth that you've never tasted before, right? Whether you go to Limpopo as an example and just kind of get that, or whether you travel to Karoo and you have Karoo lamb, it tastes different from any other lamb that has been there as an example. So there are many things that you can use to tell the story of the region, you know, where you come from. It could be the food, it could be the clothes, it could be the music, it could be anything. And I think each place of this country must express itself in a certain way so that whoever travels can make those connections as well.
Ngomo, I cannot let you go without us talking about this as well. Have we as SA Tourism an audit of the beauty and splendor of each and every town and what that town should be packaging for its residents to be able, number one, to create jobs according to that particular unique offering? And I'm thinking about, you know, in my traveling, my little travel experience around the world, one of my favorite destinations or experiences, as you said, tourism is experience. One of my unforgettable experiences is dinner on the River Nile in Cairo, in Egypt. And I'm thinking we've got wonderful rivers in South Africa, and I'm glad that the Vaal River in Vereeniging has an offering of the Vaal River tours on that boat, people doing birthday parties on the boat and wedding anniversaries and all of this. And I'm thinking towns like Aliwal North are supposed to be renowned, amongst other things, for the tour of the Orange River. And I'm coming to the part of the conversation that says, have we an audit, a towns and cities audit of what is uniquely supposed to be a tourism offering from each and every town in South Africa?
So the short answer, Mdange, is no. We are still very immature as a country from a tourism offering perspective. And I'll tell you why. And this is actually mimicked across the continent as well. Look, Africa has been blessed with a lot of natural minerals and resources. What that has done, it has made all of us focus on mining and extraction. So whether in South Africa we focus on diamonds, we are focusing on gold. In Angola, you focus on oil. In Nigeria, oil, etc., right? We've really been looking at extractive stuff that is coming through on that side. And secondary to it is probably agriculture, right? What we haven't done is to actually diversify our economies as countries. The problem that you have with an Angola, the problem we have with Nigeria, they are too reliant on oil. When the oil price goes down, so it's not balanced from that perspective. Now, South Africa is leading the chant that says, you know, the diamonds are running out of the ground, right? The gold is running out of the ground. It's getting more dangerous. We go deeper and deeper. What other areas of this economy can we light up that fills that gap? Now, South Africa has identified tourism as one of them. Number one, if you look after it, they actually start to use. Now, as a result, then you are starting to change an economy that was so dependent on gold, diamond, and extractive, to say now, actually, you don't need to be really Koduka and go to the mines, in Joburg or Northwest in order to make a living. How then do you look around you to say, well, this is a tourism environment in itself. What do we have that is unique from anywhere else that we are able to offer? Now, that's the backdrop. Now, what are we going to do going forward? What COVID has done, it has actually made us accelerate some of the things now they actually said, let's do them much quicker. Now it is about saying, how do we use technology to accelerate all of this? So therefore, I don't now need to get on a car and drive from city to city. Through technology, is I can enable everyone who lives in the city to upload whatever it is that they have in to the center. Now, what essentially you're trying to do ultimately with this is that you want to be able to go into a cell phone, right? Yakon, go to an app, whatever it is, and search by geography, by location, by price, by experience, and find what it is that you're looking for. So for the first time now, you're going to be having small players being visible on big platforms so they can also get the exposure there. Now, to give a bit of an example, there is something popular that happens a Free State, try Makufe as an example, right? In Makufe, iba booked to our accommodation, like literally 3, 4, 5, 6 months before. Now, the oddest thing is that I can assure you there is a B&B somewhere in Bloemfontein that says, hey, I've got accommodation. But the problem when about go, it was all visible go. Now, through these platforms that we want to create as the tourism body, it then enables for this small player to be visible to people like yourself who are looking for them as well. So that, and this thing can also what you call geolocated, must be smart. And this one and this is a Kokstad. I must be able to look at my phone. What can I do in Kokstad? Right? I've got 3 hours, I've got 3 days, right? That I can click, oh, I can do this, and I can go to this market, I can do that. That's how you're going to map up the country so that it's available digitally and electronically, but it's going to be user generated. I can't do that somewhere as but it's about saying, what is it about who are in the tourism industry or in the spine the tourism industry to saying, here's an experience that people can have and do or stay here.
Sisa Ntshona, my guest today, my last question as we wrap up, Ngomoshe. The metrics are listening to us, the grade 11s, the grade 12s. There are young people, and I'm very, very passionate about youth development because I craft my career way back when I was a young person. And so young people are listening, the grade 11s are listening. And from a bursaries and opportunities point of view, your social justice as SA Tourism, do you embrace young people for scholarships and bursaries and encourage them to come to the sector? You and I have agreed there's a lot that can be done in the sector. You and I have agreed in this conversation that there are opportunities in the sector. Do you assist young people towards a career in tourism?
Okay, no problem. The first one is the youth are the future of the sector when I speak of it. The problem that is there when I'm dying is that very few people high school, very few of them lift up their hand at tourism. Right? So you're finding a lot of people are in tourism. They ended up here by mistake or error, whatever it is, but it wasn't designed from the beginning. Good news about tourism. It's changing now as people start to study and look at tourism as a career path. And it's about understanding tourism. That tourism, are you B&B only? Are you tour guiding only? It's about the entire ecosystem that you look across the board and saying, what can you contribute there? My key messaging out there is that we live in a world whereby it's no longer about getting a job, but rather about what can I create in order to be a job creator myself, right? And by that I mean is about understanding ukuthi ukuqeshwa is going to be something that on a full-time basis is going to be something that is something of the past, right? But you're going to be freeing people by freelancing and having activities right across the board. That's going to be something that is there. What are we doing as I say tourism? Now, we are in the opportunity that we've got 11 offices around the world. We've got one in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in New York, in London, in Germany, in Australia, in China, in Lagos, in Luanda. But anyway, there's a lot of us around there. What we do is we have learnerships and we take in people, right? I think about 20 every year. These are hotly contested positions. And what we do is that we give them a broad exposure for 2 years of the business, of the operations, and be really in the coalface. And we will even send you on 1 or 2 of our offices overseas so you can experience it globally as well. And the whole idea when I'm dying is that we don't want to keep these people. So from about 2 years exposure, Makabe out and say now, you go now and create, in the sector. You'll become attractive to be employed, or you'll have ideas now, having seen on the other side, as to what you can create and develop. We need a disruption, because when we talk about transformation, we need disruption. And disruption is going to come from people outside in, not from ourselves. We're just too in it to see it close, but it's going to come from outside to saying, yes, we can make this thing work better, faster. We can provide X, Y, and Z and experiences and everything else there. We are very fortunate in that it's a sector that is dominated by females, by ladies, which is lovely in itself, right across the board. However, the ownership part is still male, and I would like to see that change over some time, as things move forward.
Well, Sisa, thank you so much. We have come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for having agreed to be part of the Putco Mafani conversations today, and to all those people, who participated, and some who were just, messages have been flooding in, people that are saying, I am watching. I'm watching from East London. I'm watching from Durban. I'm watching from Pulukwane. I'm watching from Kimberley, etc. And thank you so much. And some of them have been watching from overseas. Our guest, Sisa Ntshona, ladies and gentlemen, he is the Chief Executive of SA Tourism. Gomo, thank you so much again. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you, Mdangan. Hope to be back again. We can discuss the whole day about tourism. Abulela, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Well, that brings us to the end of the show today. So we'll see you again next week on Thursday. And soon we will bring you on the show some of those people that have beaten COVID-19. They went to positive status and they came back negative and are in full swing with their lives and their jobs and their businesses. We're going to come. They're going to come. We're going to profile them. They're going to encourage you as well. My name is Putco Mafani. We've come to the end of the show. Goodbye. Thank you for tuning in.